Happy Tuesday. We're here for another episode of the Ask Me Anything. I got a bunch of questions after the last video, which I'm excited about. I love answering y'all's questions. So please, if you guys have questions, drop them in the comments below. As promised, I will make sure that those are the first questions to get answered on the next week's AMA. So just a heads up, if you guys are watching this right now, live, it is not too late to jump on and watch my thyroid talk in just 45 minutes. I'm going to try to make this a little bit quicker today, although I do have like 4 or 5 questions I've got to get through. So we're going to answer those questions here, make sure I have plenty of time to go over those. But I do have a thyroid talk starting at 6 o'clock tonight in the office. Obviously, it might be a little bit late for you to get to the office for the talk, but you can catch that online. I will actually go ahead and drop really quickly the event link to that. So if you see this, you can go on there and you can actually register for the online version of that. And even if you can't make it online right at 6 o'clock when that starts, you can always go back and watch it later. You'll actually get an email sent to your inbox with the link. So I just dropped the link to that in the chat box here. So if you want to catch that thyroid talk, go ahead and grab the link. If you missed it, just let us know, drop thyroid or something in the comments, and I'll make sure to get you a copy of the thyroid talk I'm doing in the office tonight. But like I said, lots of questions from last week, so we'll go ahead and just get started with those. The first one, specifically from the video last week, was about osteoporosis and supplements that women can take for osteoporosis as they start to age and kind of go through menopause. So big thing with osteoporosis and menopause is your risk for osteoporosis actually goes up significantly as you go through menopause, and it's because of a drop in estrogen levels. So estrogen levels are one of the main things that maintain bone density. So a lot of women get tested for osteoporosis and they get put on calcium and things like that. Yeah, bones are made of calcium, and you get osteoporosis because the calcium starts leaching out of your bones, but just taking more calcium isn't going to just start driving that calcium back into the bones. So the big thing we got to work on there is questioning why is that happening in the first place. So balancing estrogen levels out is going to be a super important thing, because we can't just drive calcium back into the bones and remineralize those bones if we've got a metabolic or hormonal issue that's driving the calcium out of the bone. So that's the first thing, is just making sure that we're not getting into a bunch of, like, we don't have a bunch of hormonal issues or metabolic issues that are going on under the surface. The next thing is, if we think about just physiologically, how is bone laid down, or what stimulates bone to be laid down? It's actually the pulling of the muscles on the sheath. So there's a single cell layer thick kind of layer that surrounds the bone, and when muscles or tendons that insert into the bone pull on that cell layer, it actually stimulates osteoblasts to build more bone. So strength training is one of the best things that you can do to maintain bone density. This is one of the biggest reasons that it's so important that women do strength training workouts early in life and start building muscle mass, because muscle mass is one of the biggest predictors of longevity, and it's very protective. So we've got to make sure that we're doing things before we get into menopause to help support and stabilize bone density. So that's kind of the biggest thing there, is we want to make sure that we're working to improve estrogen levels. We're doing some sort of strength training stuff. And then the other thing that can actually mimic strength training is the vibration plates. So we have vibe plates. If you come into the office and get adjusted, I'm sure you've stood on the vibe plates. We have everybody use those after adjustments. Helps increase the brain's awareness of the movement we just put into the body, helps increase neurological activation and the brain's awareness of joint position space. But the vibration plate was actually invented by NASA to help prevent astronauts from losing bone density in space, because the vibration vibrates that single cell layer that's around the bones, and actually stimulates bone density growth in the same way that muscles pulling on the bone would. And the big thing was astronauts were losing a lot of bone density just because they were in space and the weight of gravity wasn't on their body all the time, so there wasn't that physical pulling on the bones, and astronauts were coming back with very weak bones. NASA started sending vibration plates up there with them, and it actually helps to offset bone density. So that's something that you can use after menopause. If you are struggling with bone density, it's something that's great to use all the time for not only bone density, but neurological activation, lymphatic drainage, circulation. So there's all sorts of cool things that are beneficial from using that vibe plate. So hopefully that helps with the osteoporosis question. If you guys have more questions, feel free to jump on here and ask those. I'll try to get as many of these answered as I can. The next one was a specific question about a supplement that we carry in the office called Albizia. So Albizia is a really cool supplement. It helps with what's called mast cell stabilization. So mast cells specifically in the gut are going to respond to foods that we eat that we're allergic to, or we have an IgE or IgG response to. So it's going to help offset the histamine response, the inflammatory response to the foods that we're eating. So the question was more about like, how do I use Albizia if I'm going to eat out? So what I always tell people is ideally you want to take it about 10 to 20 minutes before you're going to go eat something you're not supposed to. Usually about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon, just depending on kind of your body size and how much you're going to eat and all that stuff. But typically what I'll do is we have like little travel bottles, and so we'll just take the travel bottle with us. We'll do a couple of droppers in our mouth before we eat if we're going out to eat something that we're not supposed to. Now, the caveat here, excuse me, is that just taking Albizia doesn't give you permission to just go eat whatever you want and it doesn't matter. However, there are some times where things are out of our control, especially around the holidays, where we're going to go to family's house and we don't want to be that in-law or that friend that just won't eat anything. So Albizia does help to mitigate a lot of the inflammatory responses to foods, but we do still have to be good with the foods that we're eating, and we don't want to just be taking Albizia every day just to go and be able to eat whatever we want. I got another question on a video I posted last week about fasting and the benefits of fasting for men. So my recommendations for fasting with men, the big ones were going to be intermittent fasting 5 to 6 days a week, doing a full 24-hour water fast once a month, and 3-day fasting about once a quarter. Those were general recommendations that I said were okay for most men to do. And then I left the caveat that women don't fast, don't follow any of those recommendations unless you're working with a doctor who understands what's going on in your body. So I guess to expand on that a little bit more, these are going to be generalizations for females. The big thing that we don't want to do with females is activate a stress response. Females tend to be a lot more susceptible to stress just because of the regulation of their hormones. And so the big thing is when we fast, our blood sugar is going to drop. And so then the stress response kicks in. Our body increases cortisol levels, which then help to increase your blood sugar to normal levels so you don't go super hypoglycemic. The problem is that, number one, that response requires a cortisol response. So we've got to make sure that we have enough cortisol. So if we were to look at something like a cortisol awakening response or a Dutch test and see that your cortisol was completely flatlined, that would be a big issue for me, because that tells me as your doctor, your provider, that if you're going to go into a fasted state, I know your body's already struggling to produce cortisol. There's a lower chance that you're going to be able to create enough of a response. There's a higher chance you're going to end up hypoglycemic, which is not the goal. The other side of that is if we're super high on the cortisol response, we don't want to be spiking cortisol even more. We want to be doing things to actually reduce cortisol. So typically for females, it's actually better to eat first thing in the morning. And then if you are going to do intermittent fasting, typically females are going to respond better to intermittent fasting in the evenings. But again, I want to preface this with, we need to know where your hormones are at. We need to know where your stress levels are at so that we're not taking your system in a negative way to do fasting. Some women feel great when they fast. Some women feel absolutely terrible and have no energy, and it feels like their brains don't work and they get really tired and angry. That's a pretty good idea that your cortisol levels are out of balance, your hormones may be off, and we need to be really, really careful with fasting. I had another question on here about supplements for UTIs. So UTIs obviously very common in females. If you're getting chronic recurrent UTIs, typically that indicates that there's some sort of bacterial imbalance in the gut. There could be yeast overgrowth in the gut. And so from a supplement standpoint, there's a couple things that we'll use. I'm sure most people have heard of cranberry juice. And the reason that we use cranberry juice is because it's really high in a sugar called D-Mannose. And what D-Mannose does is it doesn't get absorbed into the body. So we actually flush it through the urinary tract, and all those bacteria in the gut kind of hop on board that D-Mannose. They bind to it. It prevents them from binding into the urinary wall or into the bladder wall, and they kind of take a ride out. So I always refer to it as kind of like a school bus. It just picks up all those bacteria and kind of pushes them all out. Now, the caveat is D-Mannose is really good for the main staph or E. coli bacteria that causes UTIs. It's not going to be active for things like Klebsiella pneumoniae. So you can take D-Mannose preventatively. If you're someone who takes D-Mannose all the time and it doesn't seem like it's helping the UTIs, it could just be that you're getting colonized with a different bacteria, and then doing a urinalysis and getting that actually cultured out to see the type of bacteria could allow us to be a little bit more specific. But in general, as soon as you start noticing those UTI symptoms, just really, really increasing D-Mannose supplements can be very helpful, and you want to take that throughout the day for longer than you think you need to, even after the symptoms have gone away, because we want to make sure we completely flush out that bacteria. The other supplement that's very good for UTIs is called Uva Ursi. And what Uva Ursi does is it actually tightens up the cells in that endothelial lining of the bladder wall. So it helps to repair the damage and calm down some of the inflammation in the bladder wall as a result of UTIs. So typically with UTIs, Uva Ursi and D-Mannose are going to be the two kind of 1-2 punch for getting rid of those UTIs. The big caveat with Uva Ursi is if you're pregnant and you get UTIs, you can do some D-Mannose, you cannot do Uva Ursi. So you've got to really make sure you're working with your doctor about that and make sure that you're taking things that are safe during pregnancy. And then the last question we got, and this is a question I get all the time, is just about sleep. And the question was specifically relating to sleep trackers. I wear a Whoop strap here. It's awesome for sleep tracking. I love it. It's got a journal. I've done a bunch of videos to talk about kind of the journal, and it actually tracks your recovery when you do certain activities and tells you when you do this activity, it increases your recovery by this much, and when you do this activity, it decreases it by this much. And that's really cool because it allows you then dial in your activities throughout the day to make sure that you're doing things that are supporting recovery. So the Whoop strap is what I personally wear. My wife wears an Oura Ring. That's awesome for sleep tracking as well. The Ultimate Human is another ring. There's all sorts of sleep trackers out there. One of the big things you'll notice is that the reliability from one sleep tracker to the next is not that great. So if I were to wear a Whoop strap and an Oura Ring at the same time, chances are they're both going to pick up the duration of sleep, the time I went to bed, the time I woke up, probably going to be pretty similar with the time I'm awake. But there's probably going to be some discrepancy in light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep. And that's not overly important. What I usually tell people is you just want to see where your body's at and how your body is responding. And so I can tell if I normally get 2 hours of deep sleep and an hour and a half of REM sleep, and then all of a sudden I'm only getting an hour of deep sleep, I know that that's an issue. And so I can track that based on my averages, and I can work to do things that increase kind of my own averages. I'm not necessarily comparing my deep sleep on a Whoop strap to your deep sleep on an Oura Ring, because there may be discrepancies just in the way that they track that and the way their algorithms work. But whichever one you choose, they're going to be helpful. They're going to give you a lot of really cool insights. I personally just like the Whoop strap because of the way it presents the data to me and because of that journal feature. And to be totally honest, I'm not as familiar with the Oura Ring and the Ultimate Human Rings interface. They may have journals as well. They may be just as good. I just personally am not familiar with them, so I can't speak to it. I typically would recommend the Oura Ring more for females because of its cycle tracking. Now the Whoop strap just started doing cycle tracking and stuff as well. The newer models are measuring basal body temperature. I obviously am not a female. I don't have the cycle tracking stuff set up on my Whoop strap, so I have no idea what that's like. So hopefully that helped answer some of your questions. If there's any other questions, you can go ahead and drop those down below. Like I said, I've got my thyroid talk in about 20 minutes here, so I'm going to jump off. I'm going to get that thyroid talk going. It's not too late. I did drop in the comment section below the link, so if you want to go ahead and sign up online, even if you can't watch the whole thing at 6 o'clock, if you at least sign up, you'll get the recording sent to you. And if you're watching this back later and you missed the whole thing, that's totally fine. Just drop thyroid in the comments below, and we'll make sure we get you the recording of that talk sent to you. So hope to see some of you on there. We'll see you guys next Tuesday. If you have questions as you're watching this back, go ahead and drop them in the comments, and I'll get to those answered for you next week. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week, guys.